Our country is careening toward multiple crises in food, water, energy, and more. How are you going to handle it? Don't expect the government to handle it. They're lying to you about it right now. What you need to do is think about how you can plan, prepare, and be proactive for you and your family. How to use the good times to ride out the hard times. That's what you need to be doing.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. My guest today is Sean Brodrick, who's a natural resources analyst for Weiss Research Incorporated, where he also edits several financial newsletters, including the Crisis Profit Hunter. Sean is speaking to us from Florida via Skype. Sean, thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Well, I want you to know that my partner Robin and I really enjoy your contributions to uncommon wisdom daily, every day, or nearly every day that you put them out. And I think it fits its name. It really is uncommon wisdom, because we find folks that in the investment world don't tend to be onto topics like climate change and peak oil and things crumbling around us. So thank you for being there.
No, my pleasure.
We also have fun listening to you on House Street. That's great fun.
HowStreet.com is a great website, and you will hear me ramble at least once a week when I'm on that website.
And we enjoy it. Sean, you're the author of a book, a new book, good book, I want to say, called The Ultimate Suburban Survivalist Guide, which I found really readable and personable. Your personality comes through, and you've packed it with some really useful information. So what I'm hoping we can do is a kind of whistle-stop tour through the book so that folks have a sense of your thinking and you know what all is packed into this. So I want to start actually by reading to folks what you wrote at the very beginning. You said, "Do you have a pervasive sense of anxiety as if our modern world is on thin ice? Do you have an uneasy feeling that Wall Street seems to be collapsing under the weight of bad debts and bad decisions and dragging your job along with it? Or maybe you can feel our society is coming apart at the seams and that our civilization could actually break down and collapse? You are not alone. A lot of people are worried. And in fact, there's a growing movement of people who are preparing for the end of the world as we know it." Well, those are gutsy things to say, and I think you really put your finger on the pulse for a lot of people. So what are the kinds of emergencies or disasters or situations that were on your mind when you wrote this book?
Well, the main thing that actually made me write the book was when I saw what happened after Hurricane Katrina. I mean, those poor people down there. We just saw the huge floods, loss of life, people herded into pens like animals, that kind of thing. And I realized watching that, because I live in Florida, so I'm kind of obsessed with hurricanes anyway, as most of the people are down here, that if something bad happened around here, the government would be too busy trying to save itself. You know, it has to pull itself back from the brink, from being washed out, to actually come and save me. So I decided that I had to get to work just making sure that I prepared to save myself and my family as much as possible from any kind of thing that can go wrong. Any disaster, whether it's a hurricane, flood, fire, or else maybe something that has to do with the economy. I also cover a lot of that in my book. Something like an oil crisis. I mean, our oil demand around the world is actually expected to rise 1.5 million barrels per day this year to 86.5 million barrels per day. That's over 1,000 barrels per second. The old oil fields are, kind of running out. We are finding new oil, but they have to drill down as deep as Mount Everest is high to find new oil. So that makes any oil that they actually get out of there more expensive. And the huge oil fields, they don't seem to be finding so many of those. So peak oil is out there. Peak oil is coming. It may not be here now, but it is there in the future. And things aren't staying really static on like the like user end either. Over in China and like India, they're seeing enormous amounts of purchase of like automobiles and stuff. So it's not just us wanting to use it, and we use 1/4 of the world's oil, but it's these emerging markets that are having tremendous growth. So I believe there is an oil crisis out there, and it will be coming toward us, or else we'll be speeding toward it. Then you can also have, things like a food crisis. Now, one way we can have a food crisis is to have a energy crisis, because food has to travel about 1,500 miles to get to your table. So if we have an energy crisis, it's harder for the food to get there. The other way, well, we have plenty of food right now. There's no arguing against that. However, there are over 6 billion people in the world. They want to eat and live like big fat Americans. And so we're having more strains on the global food supply, which only puts us one bad harvest away from a real crisis. So those are the kinds of things that I was trying to cover when I started writing the book. Then I started talking to people, and just more and more stuff came in, and well, you saw what happened in the end.
Well, you got carried away. I mean, you got into shutdown of the grid. The electric grid might happen, and the one that we're experiencing right now, Sean, which of course is the economic depression, deflation, whatever we want to call it, and that's hitting everybody.
Yeah, well, if you listen to the people on Wall Street, happy days are here again, but that's because they're so disconnected from Main Street. Now, there are many economic indicators that have turned positive, but one that hasn't is employment. We only had a slight bump in the employment figures in the last month, and one report does not make a recovery in that area. I think that there could be an economic recovery of sorts, but we won't see actually employment recover the way we might hope, because as all of these as these large companies recover, one thing that they have to think about constantly, because they have to report to their shareholders, is how can we save more money? The way they can save more money is by shipping our jobs overseas. So as these companies recover, they'll ship more jobs overseas, which just worsens the crisis. Until we actually address that, we won't see that change. And that's only part of the larger picture. I mean, I can really go on about this, but you have to understand that last 15 years of really good times we had was because the government was writing bad checks, and all the companies were writing bad checks. Those checks have to be paid off someday, and I think they'll have to be paid off sooner than later. But even without that, we can't keep writing bad checks, because eventually you just have a whole nest of economic problems happen.
Well, actually, that's part of the picture that I wanted you to talk about. I mean, we've got this huge deficit. The debt is huge. What might we see going forward in the economy?
Well, if we continue to fight multiple wars around the world, I mean, we hear about, we have to cut back this, have to cut back that, but we don't cut back on the empire. We have military bases in over 160 countries. Really, by just shedding some of those things. You've heard of what's happening over in Afghanistan. Hamid Karzai is thinking of joining the Taliban now. What are we there for? What are we trying to accomplish? So we certainly need to cut back, and there are many areas that really need to be cut back. It will not be easy, because people in Congress are used to living on this big gravy train where they can hand things out to just about anybody. It really takes a change of thinking in Washington to accomplish this. It will not be easy. I don't think it'll be easy at all. I'm not sure that it can actually be accomplished by someone who tells us the truth. Because if someone runs for office saying, well, I'm campaigning to give you at least 8 years of really frugal time so that we can get to the end of the tunnel, who's going to vote for the guy?
Sure.
They're voting for the guy handing out ice cream and free unicorn rides. That's the guy that they're voting for. So this is the problem. We had a real financial crisis in this country. How did we solve that crisis? We solved the crisis by taking all of the super gambling addicts, the people who were running those banks, giving them more money and sending them back to the roulette table. The chance of another financial crisis happening is actually quite high, because we didn't fix the problem. No one ends up in jail. They haven't even changed the rules. If you've seen these proposed rule changes, they're pathetic. That's because they're written by the banks, and everybody screams anytime you like restrict capitalism. We aren't restricting capitalism. We're trying to restrict the like crooks who are actually running things. That's what we're trying to restrict. I like capitalism. I don't like what's happening on Wall Street right now.
Whoa. And I don't know that are we going to see anything? I mean, Obama came in saying we'd get change and we got more of the same. And so how does, one of the parts of your book that I really appreciated was your subtitle, which is The Smartest Money Moves to Prepare for Any Crisis. What are the kind of ways that people, just ordinary, Main Street, how can Main Street protect themselves or be able to weather what may happen?
Yes, absolutely. There are things you should be doing right now. I have a whole list of them in the book, but just to give you some brief ideas. You have to pay down debt. Don't rush to pay off your home mortgage because you might need that money. And who knows, the next mortgage bailout might be you, right? But pay off your credit card debt and other high interest debt and other debt like that, the stuff that crushes you month after month after month. You also have to take a good look at your current spending. Where can you cut? Now, arguments over finances are actually more prevalent than arguments over sex and marriages. So this can be a tricky one for people to actually work out. But if you're honest with each other and what can we cut back? That's important because then you have to make a budget on how much you might want to spend on new tools, equipment for a garden, perhaps you want things you can use if we have an oil crisis, like a new bicycle, something that has nice baskets on it, or maybe like a moped. Because what if the price of gasoline goes up to maybe $5 a gallon, $6 a gallon? Not to say that it will, but if it does, can you get back and forth to work and that huge, fuel hog you have for a car? You might want to think ahead to that. You also might want to do something about learning a new skill. Why? Because if we have a severe economic crisis, your job might go away. But if you learn a new skill now, while you have time, then perhaps you can turn that into a job and also make your connections with your friends and neighbors. There's actually a good reason to do that, because if there's a really severe crisis where we lose, where we lose law and order, that kind of thing, your friends and your neighbors, those around you, that will be your best line of defense. I mean, yes, you should secure your home and stuff like that, but having your block work as a group, that's your best defense. But it's also good economically, because that's where you will find a new job if there's, some kind of big economic situation. Your friends, your neighbors, that's where you're going to really find your new jobs and stuff. Now, if you want to invest, if you're thinking of buying stocks, consider exchange traded funds. Why? Because it's harder for them to blow up in your face like an individual stock can. You don't have to do as much research. I do stock research all day long. Most people don't have the time to do that, and so they can't get into these things as deep as I do. So an exchange traded fund can really protect you. As for your, if you do buy individual stocks, look for ones that have nice yields. Say a dividend of at least 3%. Because over time, ones that have those nice yields, they actually outperform. This has been shown historically. They outperform the ones that, have no dividends. These are the kinds of things you can do. Also, one last thing is keep enough money at home to pay your expenses for 2 weeks. Why? If we have a major banking crisis like we had in the Great Depression, they could shut the banks down for 2 weeks. Back then, people said, "Oh, that's terrible." If they had any money, it was probably in their pocket. Nowadays, everyone lives on plastic.
Yeah.
If they shut the banks down for 2 weeks, people are going to freak out. They do not carry money. But if you have some stashed away in your house, you can ride out, just a very brief thing. I'm not expecting the end of civilization. I'm thinking we could go through rough patches. A really severe rough patch would be like what they had in Russia, where basically the government they had broke down and a new one came along. But that wasn't overnight. It took years, and I don't think ours would be that severe, but we could have a time where what you're used to, your normal life, will go away, and then you get some other kind of life afterwards. It might be an improved life. It might be a more simplified life where you're not rushing around a lot and like stuff like that, but it will be a different life. And so the way you can prepare yourself now is just to be much more flexible, not to be in debt, to be prepared for the institutions you trust not to be there all the time. These are the things you can do.
Wow, that's, I mean, we could sign off at this moment, but let's not. I want to go back to one of the preparations that you mentioned, because you're a money guy in the financial world there, and you suggest that people have some alternatives, besides the cash in their pocket for the 2 weeks, some alternatives to the plastic, some hard assets. What would you, if people have a little extra money, what would you do with that?
Well, I believe in owning hard assets like gold and silver. And here's the thing. I believe you need to own the physical metal, not a fund that says that it's owning the physical metal for you. I mean, we're hearing lots of rumors nowadays, and none of these rumors have been proven. It's just, it seems to be coming at a steady drip, and there was stuff happening over in London that I don't want to get into. That's a whole other show. You can have me back. We can get into that. But you need to own the physical metal because the banks may be pulling the biggest scam of all, which is not owning the gold and silver that they say they have in storage to back these funds up.
Really?
If that's the case, physical gold and silver in your hand is going to become worth a lot more. It really is. And so, but it's also good just in case we have a currency crisis. Now, right now, the US dollar is strengthening. Make no mistake about that. Why is it strengthening? Because the euro is in crisis. The euro is in crisis for, again, a whole bunch of reasons. We could go into that for a whole nother show. But basically, the US dollar is winning a beauty contest in a leper colony. It's the one losing the least amount of fingers. And so, you know, it's winning that contest. But that doesn't change the fact that the US dollar has very strong underlying problems, which are not being fixed. And these problems are mounting over time. So what if we have a currency crisis here in the US where the US dollar loses half of its value in, say, the course of a year? That would be quite catastrophic for most people. But if you had just a small portion of your wealth in physical gold, in physical silver, you would at least be cushioned. I'm not saying it would be a happy ending for everybody, but you'd have that cushion that would help see you through to like whatever life comes next.
Actually, that notion of a cushion seems to be central to not just the money advice that you give, being less vulnerable, but that cushion and flexibility seems to be behind the whole section you have on the physical preparations. So tell me about, what are those most critical physical preparations?
Right. The two most critical things are like food and water. Most people think about food. However, I can tell you here, and this is a story from like Florida, and yes, I know we have a weird state and the weird things happen here, but it might be happening in like your neighborhood too, which is one year we had 3 hurricanes. And after every single hurricane, I saw people lined up at the grocery stores to get just something because they had nothing stored at home. They never learned from one hurricane to the next to store food and water. Now, you're thinking, well, silly Floridians. Maybe. But maybe you have the same kind of thing going on around you. And if there's, say, an earthquake, we seem to be having a bunch of those lately. If I lived in the California earthquake zone, I'd be kind of nervous, actually. There will be many people around you who have been living in a bubble and oblivious, and they've been watching SportsCenter, and they know nothing about the earthquakes. And so when an earthquake happens, they are just going to panic. You will see people loot for food and water. And it's really sad to get shot trying to get food and water for your family when just some simple preparation will actually help you out. And you should be storing water anyway. That's the thing no one ever stores. And it drives me bananas because in the US, our systems for water are as old as the Civil War. A major water main breaks in the US every 2 minutes. In the Washington, D.C. area, a major water main breaks every single day. So the chance of you going into a situation where you turn on the tap and nothing comes out is actually quite high. Now, you should store 2 gallons per person plus extra for your pets per day, and you need at least 3 days. However, one thing you can do is to get a water purifier. Why? Because that allows you to take water out of a ditch and turn that into something you can drink. That way you don't have to store so much. And I really go over your different options on that. you might want to have one that can travel with you, because a big part of my book, which is not in other survivalist books, is how to be a refugee. And you have to think about this, because if something bad happens in your area, you might want to leave. And one thing you should be doing now is you should be making calls to your friends who live outside your area, right? Saying, you know, if like something terrible happens where you live, then you can come stay with me. And if something terrible happens where I live, I and my family can come stay with you. And plan your route now. You can use Google to do that. Find out which hotels you might stay in the way. Hopefully it's someplace that's not more than like 1 day's drive away. However, if everyone's trying to evacuate town at the same time, then, you know, it could be quite slow. Two other points that I really want to just really touch on. You should have a bag in your car at all times with a change of clothes for everyone in your family, some cash, and the small things you need just to get through like a weekend. Why? Because if you're away from home and something bad happens, you at least have that. Also, in your garage, you should have a larger bag stocked with a bunch of stuff that you can just throw in the car and take off when and if you see the bad news on the TV saying, you know, get out of town. You don't want to be the person packing when that happens. You want to be the person at the front of the herd getting way out there. Finally, your medicine. No one thinks about it, but if we have a major crisis, right, the government doesn't allow you to stockpile medicine. What are you going to do? First of all, you should have your medicine in the freezer in a bag, clearly marked, so you can grab that on your way out the door to the garage, so you can grab the big bag with the other hand, throw them in the car and go, right? But also, yes, but also you need to think about, what if I couldn't go down to the store for my prescription? Over half of America is on some kind of drug or another, so this is actually important. You can grow things in your own garden, and I'm a big believer in gardening anyway, but grow things in your garden that might see you over a rough patch depending on what your particular ailment is. I really go into a lot of depth in the book. It's not something you would want to do unless you had to, but then again, we're talking about a really serious situation here. You might have to. So you can grow something in your garden. They can see you over that, so that's one thing you should think about doing too. And if you don't have room for a garden, and I'll just close on this, if you don't have room for a garden, yes you do. I cover container gardening and stuff like that. You can at least grow some things. I have this upside down tomato a tree in like my patio, and like people look at that and say that's obscene. There's no way that thing should be that big. But you can get these new containers and stuff that actually grow a lot of stuff. And since I live in Florida, I've recently been pulling tomatoes off that. It's kind of a year-round thing. So there is stuff you can do. Read the book and just learn your options. The more options you have, the better off you are. Your brain is the best weapon you ever had. You just have to think about these things.
That's actually one of the things that I mean, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really like in your book is that at the end of every, I mean, you've got a chapter on food, and you've got a chapter on water, and you know, details on what to store and how much for people, and like you mentioned before, alternate transportation. What I like is at the end of every chapter, you have a little section on the very least you could do.
How to survive for lazy people, yes.
And
or
couch potatoes.
Right, exactly. And yes, I mean, so what's the absolute least you should have? You should have, you know, food, water, flashlights, and batteries. You should have some kind of plan to actually secure your house, which is important, but you should also have a plan to escape, to leave. Plan your escape routes ahead of time. That's extremely important. And make those contacts now with your friends out of the area. I mean, even a couch potato can do that. You don't have to leave your couch. You just have to pick up your phone and call somebody and say, hey, if some kind of serious like situation happens in my town, can I come stay with you? And if something serious happens where you are, you can come stay with me. These are the things you can do. I mean, you can do it all in an hour, really, and it'll just make your life so much easier, because one thing that may not work when everything goes to heck in a handcart is your cell phone. That's one more thing to consider. And so you won't be able to make those calls ahead of time. You can text people sometimes when the cell phone isn't working. I don't know why their protocols work that way, but a text will get through. That's one more thing to think about, is you might want to be able to send text to people what you might want to write. You can write those things ahead of time, saying meet me at mom's and like stuff like that, and just have those ready to go. Because in a crisis situation, I swear to God, you will see people running around in a panic. Americans live in a bubble. They don't think the bad things can happen here, but they can. I mean, we aren't immune. We're like any country. And our big problem is we're such a great and massive empire. Any empire, the larger and more complex it gets, the more inputs it needs of all types, energy, food, you name it, money, to keep on going. So it takes more and more just to keep things going the way they are. Our supply lines are stretched around the world. The status quo may be on the thin ice right now. You may not realize it. Certainly the people on TV don't want you to realize it. I mean, the stuff we see on TV, why watch it? This is why the ratings for TV shows are going down. This is why newspaper readership is going down, because people can find the truth on the internet. Why would they possibly tune in to whatever they're lying about on TV? I think like your kinds of shows, which really tries to raise awareness on this, do a great service to the public, because they will not get this on, like, say, the CBS News, Fox News, anything like that. But the people who are willing to dig in and to find these facts ahead of time and to prepare ahead of time will be so much better off than the mass herd of the people around them. Just doing these things ahead of time is like a huge survival advantage. If you can live through the first 48 hours, your odds of living out the week go up very much. If you can live through the first week, your odds of actually surviving the whole thing go up a huge amount. So these are the things that you should be doing, just the small things. And yes, if you don't have time, just pick up my book in the bookstore, read the end of each chapter. It'll say the least you can do, and make sure you have those bases covered.
Right.
Whatever works for you, but definitely plan, prepare, and be proactive, because your life and the life of your family may depend on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. This has been a Whistle Stop tour.
Well, it's been great fun. Next time you can have me on, we can talk about climate change. We can talk about any of the other topics which should be dealt with in depth. I'd be more than happy to do that. I had a great time.
Thank you. You're on.
All right.
You've been watching Peak Moment, Locally Reliant Living for Challenging Times, and my guest today is Sean Brodrick, who's the author of The Ultimate Suburban Survivalist Guide. Join us next time.